everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So, are you up for an almost 2.5 hour long historical drama from Nigeria that has sprinkles of African folklore and fable in it? If that is so, then you have come to the right place. Let's find out how good this movie is, shall we? This is my review of Aníkúlápó. So we are in what I assume is pre-colonial Nigeria somewhere, and Karo is a weaver who has come to a new kingdom. His plan is basically to, make a name for himself and, sell his goods and stuff like that. But fate would have it otherwise. He kind of befriends one of the king's favorite queens. He has multiple queens. Playa. But he also starts boinking another woman who has promised that she's going to make him world famous for, his weaving and stuff like that. So what's going to happen? Well, we have to be a little bit patient before we get to it, because one of the problems that this movie has is how sluggish the tempo is. This movie takes a long time before the plot actually kicks in. Almost an hour, even over an hour, I think, before, the mythological creatures really starts to make an impact. Because we have this smoke bird thing that comes down to him and bestow upon him a superpower, you could say. He's gained magical powers, and how he's going to use these magical powers and what will happen to him, I'm not going to spoil that. You're going to have to watch the movie to find that little thing out. But that is where the movie kind of takes off. Now, I'm going to say this, I don't know whether or not the reason for why the dialogue is kind of stilted and feels a bit unnatural is that the fact that most of these actors doesn't have English as their first language, bad translations, the way that they spoke in pre-colonial Nigeria was a little bit like this, or is it just because they're not very good? I don't know, but the acting was not on point in this movie. However, that is partially compensated by the fact that the concept of the story and the plot is very interesting, and you don't quite know where we're going with this one. Add to that the fact that we have very likable characters, and you want to see where they're taking this. Even though, as I said, it's a very sluggish tempo, and sometimes it takes forever to get nowhere, and sometimes it goes 100 miles an hour, and they're actively leaving the audience behind, or is the fact that I'm not an expert in how to tell Nigerian stories, maybe that's the fact that I feel a bit left behind sometimes. Nevertheless, the second half of the movie was better than the first half of the movie, and I said to myself when this movie felt like it was wrapping up, I guess, because this is a fable and because this is a folklore tale, almost like a fairy tale, this is probably where we're going to end, this story. And they almost kind of did that, and they actually had an ending which I thought was, on the one hand, whoa, that was cool, and on the other hand, what? What was that? So it was a little bit of a double-edged sword. I think that one of the reasons why I felt that is the fact that this happened like 10 minutes before this movie was over. They should have had at least half an hour, maybe even more than that, to properly get into what was to be the finale of this thing. The movie, however, is too long, so I wouldn't advocate for them adding even more minutes to this already kind of bloated runtime and this absolute snail's pace of a tempo in this movie. Another plus that this movie has is the level of productions. Sometimes when I'm watching Nigerian movies, I haven't seen more than like half a dozen, so it may sound more like it is. But one of my major criticisms against them are usually the fact that their productions looks a little ramshackled sometimes, and it feels like they don't have enough money to pull off what they want to pull off. They have like a difficulty level of 10 and an execution level of 5, where it should have been the opposite. But in this case, I thought that they made a very good job of recreating pre-colonial Africa in this movie, and I thought that the movie looked good and the movie had interesting themes to itself. Maybe some of the messages and life lessons was a little bit on the nose for some people, but hey ho, what you gonna do? If you've never seen this movie, this is not a movie I necessarily, advise you to see. If you are going to see one Nigerian movie, I think Namasta Wahala, which I actually reviewed last year, or if it was 2 years ago, which I think was a better movie, if that movie also had its fair share of problems. But I thought this movie had a good execution, but the structure of the movie and the acting of this movie dragged the whole thing down a little bit. But it was a decent enough movie. I just wish that the story could have been told a little bit more robust way, and they didn't need all of these minutes to tell this story. Maybe I don't have the experience enough to properly tell whether or not this is a good Nigerian movie or not, but it was an entertaining story and I got into it, but it takes a bit of time for it to actually get to the point where the really interesting things happens. The setup phase is a little bit too long, but it's a little bit of column A, column B, so it was decent. This is a pretty okay movie. Nothing that will leave a big impact on you, however. I will give this movie 29 points. There was this moment in this movie where I thought, now they're going somewhere, now they're really gonna go somewhere, but they kind of pumped the brakes a little bit on it, and they never could get out of, the second gear of this movie. The movie, as I said, is a little bit slow and the tempo is a bit sluggish, but I do like the atmosphere that this movie had, and there was a lot of things in this movie that worked, but there was more things that did not quite work out as they wanted to. By the way, it should also be said that this is not an action movie. This is an historical drama with fantasy elements and with folklore elements sprinkled into the whole thing. So if you want big action set pieces, you have to look elsewhere. So I'll see you next time from Well So and So Reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.